Welcome back to a Wicked Historian.
In the early 1900s, there was a job in America that every young woman wanted. It paid better than factory work, it was clean, respectable, and modern. And at night, the workers glowed. Not metaphorically, literally, women would leave the factory laughing, their dresses shimmering faintly in the dark. Some brushed glowing paint on their teeth before dates. Others painted their nails for fun. They were told the glow meant health, that it meant progress, that it meant the future. What no one told them was that the glow was killing them. In 1917, America was obsessed with time. World War I had made accurate watches essential, and radium-based paint, newly discovered and wildly misunderstood, was the miracle solution. It glowed without light. It never faded. Factories opened across the United States, especially in New Jersey and Illinois, and inside them sat rows of young women, most barely out of school, hired to paint tiny numbers on watch dials. They were called dial painters, but history would remember them by another name, the Radium Girls. Among them was Grace Fryer, quiet, sharp, ambitious. She believed this job was her chance at independence, something rare for women at the time. Supervisors taught the women a precise technique: lip, dip, paint. They were told to point the brush with their lips to keep the numbers perfect. They did it hundreds of times a day, thousands. When some of the girls asked if radium was dangerous, managers laughed. They assured them it was harmless, healthy, even. Meanwhile, the men in the lab wore gloves and lead aprons, but the women didn't know that. They trusted the science. They trusted the company. They trusted America. At first, everything seemed fine. The paychecks came. The glow was fun. The future felt bright. Then the symptoms began. A toothache that wouldn't go away, a jaw that swelled, then softened, bones that cracked under their own weight. Doctors were confused. Some blamed poor hygiene. Others blamed female hysteria. One woman was told she had syphilis, a lie that destroyed her reputation overnight. Grace watched her friends fade. She watched their smiles disappear. She watched their bones betray them. And still, the factories kept running. Radium, it turned out, behaves like calcium. When swallowed, it doesn't leave the body. It settles into the bones, and it destroys them from the inside. By the time the truth began to surface, it was already too late for many of the women. The company denied everything, paid off doctors, changed names, moved locations. But Grace Fryer was done staying quiet. She didn't want revenge. She wanted the truth, and she was willing to fight the most powerful industrial interests in America to get it. What Grace didn't know yet was that even proving she was dying would be harder than the disease itself. The company, the United States Radium Corporation, mounted a vicious campaign of denial. They hired their own doctors to release reports claiming the women were perfectly healthy. They insisted their factories were safe. When Grace Fryer tried to find a lawyer, she was turned away over and over again. No one wanted to take on such a powerful corporation. They told her the statute of limitations had run out. They told her she had no case. Her body was failing. Her time was running out, and the legal system seemed designed to protect the very people who had poisoned her. But Grace was relentless. Alongside four of her former co-workers, Edna Hussman, Catherine Schaub, and Keenta MacDonald and Albina Larsh, she finally found a young, ambitious lawyer named Raymond Barry who was willing to take their case. The media latched onto the story, dubbing them the Radium Girls. Public opinion began to shift, but the company's lawyers were ruthless. They used every delay tactic they could think of. They requested postponements, hoping the women would become too sick to testify, or worse, die before the trial could even begin. And they were getting sicker. Grace's jaw had to be held together with a steel brace. She couldn't walk without assistance. Every court appearance was an excruciating ordeal. The press documented their every struggle, their gaunt faces and frail bodies becoming symbols of corporate greed. The company offered a settlement, but it came with a catch: they would not admit any fault. For Grace, This wasn't just about money for medical bills. It was about justice. It was about making sure no one else would ever have to go through what she and her friends had endured. The legal battle dragged on. The women were subjected to invasive and painful medical examinations, their bodies literally exhumed for scientific study and while they were still alive. One scientist, Dr. Harrison Martland, developed a groundbreaking test that could detect radium in their bones by measuring the radon gas in their breath. It was undeniable proof. The evidence was finally irrefutable. The radium from the paint was inside them, slowly eating away at their skeletons. With their backs against the wall and public sentiment firmly against them, the U.S. Radium Corporation was forced to settle. In 1928, the women won. The settlement provided each woman with a lump sum payment and a yearly pension for as long as they lived. It also covered all of their legal and medical expenses. It was a landmark victory, but it came at an unthinkable cost. None of the 5 women lived for more than a few years after the settlement. Grace Fryer passed away in 1933, at the age of 34, but their story didn't end there. The case of the New Jersey Radium Girls sparked a national outcry. It brought the dangers of radium to the public's attention and led to another, similar case against the Radium Dial Company in Illinois, led by a woman named Catherine Wolfe Donahue. This second case was just as hard-fought. At one point, Catherine was so weak she had to be carried into the courtroom on a stretcher to testify. But she, too, won. The legacy of these women is monumental. Their fight led directly to the establishment of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA. It led to life-saving labor laws that protect workers from hazardous materials and hold companies accountable for their safety. Before the Radium Girls, workers had very few rights. If you got sick on the job, it was considered your problem. After them, the legal landscape was changed forever. The principle was established that companies have a direct responsibility for the health and safety of their employees. The tragic glow that once symbolized a bright future became a symbol of a dark and painful chapter in industrial history. But through their courage and their refusal to be silenced, Grace Fryer, Catherine Donahue, and all the Radium Girls turned their personal tragedy into a lasting victory for workers' rights everywhere. They shone a light on corporate negligence and, in doing so, made the world a safer place for generations to come. Their glow may have faded, but their legacy never will. Years after the last Radium Girl died, the glow was still there. Not in photographs, not in memories, in the ground. Construction workers digging in New Jersey began reporting strange readings on their equipment. Soil that shouldn't react was lighting up. Houses built decades later sat on land that quietly emitted radiation. The women were gone, but the poison stayed. After the court settlements, America moved on quickly. New wars, new technologies, new distractions. The Radium Girls became a footnote, if they were mentioned at all. The companies rebranded. Executives retired comfortably. The factories closed, their doors locked, their floors never cleaned. No warning signs, no fences, no apologies. Radium had been treated like a miracle, then like a scandal, and finally, like a secret. For years, families lived near these sites without knowing what was beneath them. Children played in yards that still carried invisible danger. In some towns, cancer rates quietly climbed. Doctors didn't connect the dots, not at first. Because radium doesn't announce itself, it waits. What made the Radium Girls especially dangerous to forget was this: their suffering proved something nobody wanted to admit, that the system worked exactly as designed. The women weren't poisoned by accident, they were poisoned by denial. By executives who knew just enough science to protect themselves, and just enough power to sacrifice others. Internal documents later revealed that company scientists had been aware of radium's risks while publicly calling it harmless. They drank radium water in front of reporters as a stunt, then secretly spat it out. The workers never got that option, and when the women began dying, the response wasn't panic. It was strategy. Delay the lawsuits. Question the victims. outlast them, and it almost worked. If Grace Fryer had died a little earlier, if reporters hadn't caught on, if the public hadn't been just curious enough, this story would have vanished completely. What's unsettling is how familiar that pattern feels today. A new substance is introduced. It's praised as revolutionary. Early warnings are dismissed as exaggeration. And the people closest to the risk, the workers, the poor, the replaceable, pay first. Asbestos, lead, certain industrial chemicals. Different names, same logic. The Radium Girls didn't just change labor laws. They forced America to confront an uncomfortable truth. Progress without accountability is just organized harm. Before them, companies were rarely held responsible for long-term health damage. After them, that excuse began to crumble, slowly, incompletely, but permanently. Grace Fryer never lived to see her legacy fully acknowledged. For decades, history books skipped her name. There were no monuments, no national apologies, just silence. It wasn't until much later, when historians began digging into forgotten court records and medical reports, that the full scope of the tragedy became clear. These women weren't reckless, they weren't ignorant, they were lied to. And they believed what they were told because trust was the currency of the time. Even today, some of their personal belongings remain radioactive, not enough to make headlines. Just enough to remind scientists that radium doesn't forgive easily. It embeds, it persists, it remembers. There's a quiet horror in that. That something sold as beautiful, literally glowing, could hollow people out from the inside while society applauded its brilliance. That young women had to lose their teeth, their bones, their lives, just to prove they deserved protection. And perhaps the darkest part of all, if the Radium Girls were starting today, they might still be told to wait, to trust the process, to stop overreacting. History doesn't repeat itself loudly, it repeats itself politely. So, when you hear stories about innovation moving too fast to stop, or safety concerns being overblown, remember the glow. Remember the women who trusted it, because the most dangerous thing in history is ignorance. It's certainty, mixed with power, and no one willing to say no. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe to A Wicked Historian. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter, because history still has secrets it hasn't finished telling. And tell me in the comments, what story should we uncover next? Thanks for watching.